Senator from Wyoming.
As chairman of the Budget Committee, I come to the floor on a regular basis and give some bad news, hopefully in small doses. If the small doses don't work, I'm going to have to go to bigger doses, but we do have a crisis of overspending, and we're going to have some more opportunities to talk about spending. Private sector pensions are what I'm going to talk about today. Private sector pensions are relied upon by millions of Americans for retirement security. They're agreements that are made between an employer and its employees, or a union and its members, which allow the recipients to receive payments in retirement. Those payments are based on a formula that includes a number of factors, including years of service. Now, I've worked on pension policy for all of my professional life. I've dealt with pensions as a young accountant, as the mayor of the city of Gillette, member of the Wyoming legislature, member of the Senate Pensions Committee, chairman of the Senate Pensions Committee, member of the Senate Finance Committee, chairman of the Senate Retirement Security Subcommittee, chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, and chairman of the Conference Committee on the 2006 Pension Protection Act that saved pensions for thousands of workers without wholesale business bankruptcy. I also authored the 2006 Pension Protection Act, which dramatically altered the funding rules and made single-employer pension plans much more stable. The Act also made significant changes to defined contribution plans that drastically improved participation. I believe it's safe to say that I speak today from my experience as a member of this body with a large background in pension policy, and I'm concerned about where we're heading. Out of the 24,361 single-employer pension plans that we have information on, 4,486 are underfunded. The most recent actuarial estimations of the underfunding by the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation is over $758 billion. That should concern us because the assets of the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation single employer insurance program are $85 billion. Let's see. Underfunded by $758 billion, that's rounding it down actually, it should be $59 billion, with assets of $85 billion. Now, Mr. President, let me say that another way. And say it again, the insurance program for that $758 billion only has $85 billion in assets. But that's not even our biggest pension problem. Out of the 1,361 multi-employer pension plans, that means the collectively bargained agreements that we have information on, 1,238 are underfunded. The most recent actuarial estimations of that underfunding is just over $611 billion. So what are the assets of the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation? $1.9 billion. In other words, the safety net for $611 billion is $1 9/10 billion. I'd equate that to trying to catch a whale shark with a net made for minnows. This shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. The PBGC wrote in its 2015 annual report that it's more likely than not that the multi-employer program's assets will be depleted in 2025. The insurance policy for collectively bargained pensions is on track to become insolvent in less than a decade. In fact, if Central States Trucking goes under, it will reduce that amount considerably. Altogether, private sector pensions are underfunded by $1.35 trillion, or to put it in a better perspective, $1,350 billion. That's the private sector pensions. On top of that, per the most recent actuarial data available for state and local pensions, the total amount of underfunding in the public sector pension plan is $1 2/10 trillion, or $1,200 billion. So, Mr. President, the total amount of unfunded liabilities in both private and public sector pension plans is around $2,600 billion. That means that these pension plans have agreed to pay out $2 6/10 trillion more than they have available. For reference, again, $2 6/10 trillion is $2,600 billion, and it's more than double what our current annual spending is that Congress gets to make decisions on. That includes defense, transportation, agriculture, and education. Twice what we spend on the things we get to make decisions on. I've heard from some of my colleagues who've come to the Senate floor and speak to the troubling predicaments of specific pension plans. Many of them are currently advocating for shoring up the United Mine Workers of America pension plan, which is just one of the 1,238 union pension plans that are underfunded. I'm concerned about this for several reasons. First, if we take the steps my colleagues are advocating for with regard to the United Mine Workers, what are we going to do with the next underfunded pension plan that comes around looking for assistance? And what about the plan after that? There are hundreds of private sector pension plans in critical, endangered, or declining status throughout America today. So I'm not sure how Congress would help the United Mine Workers and not the others. Paraphrasing President Washington, we're walking on untrodden ground. There is scarcely any part of our conduct which may not hereafter be drawn into precedent. I've frequently heard my colleagues try to differentiate this case by speaking of a promise of a pension that was made to retirees in this particular union. But that agreement was between the members and the union. It was not an agreement with the federal government. Second, I find it necessary to remind my colleagues that this country is $19 trillion in debt and consistently increasing our spending. We don't have the money to shore up pension plans. And to be clear, despite proponents arguing that this legislation is paid for by coal company contributions to the abandoned mine land trust, in reality, it would be paid for by the taxpayers. The Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act is funded by a tax levied on mining operators per tonnage of coal harvested. Interest from the Abandoned Mine Land Fund can currently be transferred to 3 trusts to support United Mine Workers' health care benefits of orphan miners. Orphan miners are those whose companies no longer exist but have some health problems. And if the abandoned mine land interest does not cover these health care costs, the 3 United Mine Worker health care plans are entitled to payments from the U.S. Treasury. Mr. President, the AML interest payments are often not sufficient to meet the 3 United Mine Workers health care plan needs. So the general fund of the Treasury provides the balance. For example, in fiscal year 2012, interest from the Abandoned Mine Land Fund paid $48.4 million towards the health care funds, and the U.S. Treasury General Fund, the taxpayer dollars, provided $205.6 million. 48 to 205.6 million. So the AML interest cannot take on another obligation. And now my colleagues are asking taxpayers to pay even more for the health care, more than the health care for the United Mine Worker beneficiaries. And the portion of funds coming from the U.S. Treasury will only increase. As I mentioned, the AML trust is funded by a tax levied on coal harvested. The key word here is harvested. It breaks my heart to say this, but according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, U.S. coal production, or harvesting, is projected to be down over 25% this year compared to 2014. That's due in large part to Mercury Air Toxic Standards Rule, the Stream Protection Rule, the Clean Power Plan, the freeze on federal coal leases, the proposed increase in coal royalty rates, and everything else the administration is doing to shut down coal. Less coal being harvested means less taxes will be paid into the Abandoned Mine Land Trust Fund. As those abandoned mine land dollars dry up, More and more of the money this bill proposes to use for United Mine Workers' health care and pensions will come from taxpayer dollars. Again, I'll point out that this agreement was made between the members and the union, not between the members and the American taxpayer. Mr. President, that bears repeating. The United Mine Workers Agreement was made between the members and the United Mine Workers, not between the members and the American taxpayer. It's also worth noting that the Abandoned Mine Land Fund is not unique in that it's comprised of fees paid by a specific industry or other user base. One of the most significant pension problems we hear about today is that Central States Pension Fund that I mentioned, which includes a large number of truckers. That fund is going broke, so I want to offer my colleagues an analogy using that fund. To be sure, there are roads to drive on. Trucking companies pay a higher tax on their diesel fuel, as well as taxes on truck and trailer sales, heavy tires, and heavy vehicle usage. Together with the tax that all consumers pay on every gallon of gasoline purchased, these taxes fund the Highway Trust Fund. This trust fund for highways builds roads and pays for repairs and new bridges that the trucking industry and all drivers rely on. Using a dwindling AML trust fund to shore up the United Mine Worker pension would be like shoring up the Central States Pension Fund with the funds that build highways because truckers pay into the highway fund. That's what the United Mine Workers is asking us to do. My guess is if we examined all the pension plans in critical and declining or endangered status, we could probably identify a fund that relevant employers or employees paid into in some way. If we go down this road, what's to stop those funds from being rated to shore up the quasi-related pensions? Where do we draw the line? Lastly, I worry about the claims that we're helping all coal miners with this proposal, when in reality the policy does absolutely nothing for miners that are not members of the United Mine Workers. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, nearly 11,000 workers in the coal industry have lost their jobs in the last year, largely due to this administration's policies. Yet my colleagues have proposed a bill that would help only a portion of those people, and the bill wouldn't help put those folks back to work, developing the energy source that generates 33% of America's electricity last year. Instead, proponents of this bill are saying, if you're a member of the United Mine Workers of America, we want to help you with your health care and benefits, pensions. But if you're not, if you want your job back, then too bad. Mr. President, I am not without sympathy for the United Mine Workers coal miners. Remember, I helped the Overton miners get their health care. Coal miners play an integral part in our economy, and my colleagues have heard me say time and again that America runs on coal. Nowhere is that more evident than in my home state of Wyoming, which produces 40% of the nation's coal. In fact, we produce more coal than the 2nd through 6th states in coal production combined. I have the deepest respect for coal miners, and I'm worried about those who've been laid off in Wyoming and across the country. I understand the unique health care needs of miners, and I respect the health care promise this country has made to the miners over many decades. I've supported those health care needs in the past, most specifically by working across the aisle to shore up the 3 United Mine Workers health care funds back in the mid-2000s. I believe it's important that coal miners continue to receive quality health care. I also believe that it's crucial that they, as well as all Americans, have the opportunity to live out their retirement years in financial solvency. But I also want America to remain financially solvent. I don't believe the efforts of my colleagues advocating for this United Mine Workers bill help the United Mine Workers in a way that's fair to the federal taxpayers or the other coal miners across America. I also know the troubling truth about some of America's pension plans, as I pointed out on this chart, that are underfunded, as well as the faces of the participants within those plans. I've met with them. I've heard their stories throughout my professional life. There are facets of our retirement system that we can fix to help retirees, but I remain concerned about the use of federal tax dollars to shore up specific pension plans and to make false promises. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.